Welcome, and good morning from the Lincoln Center for Applied Ethics at Arizona State University. And we're so pleased that you're here, and we hope you will find this a very enlightening and enjoyable morning of discussion of some very important ethical issues that surround the concept of cheating. And I'm going to tell you very, very briefly what the plan for the morning is, and then we'll get right on with our presentations. You're going to hear two presentations in what we might call the first part of the morning, and following that, we're going to have a break. The break will come up around 10 o'clock or so, and there will be some refreshments out in the lobby. And if you need to use restrooms, I'm told they're on either side, over here and over here, during that time period. That'll run about 15 minutes, and then we'll be back for the last half of the presentations. We'll also arranged enough time so that following the final presentation, you will have an opportunity to ask all kinds of questions of all four of the presenters. And believe me, I think you'll have a lot of them. So by and large, you might want to hold on to your questions until then. But if, and I'm told from the various speakers you're going to hear, that if you get sort of to the point you've just got to ask one right then and there, feel free to do so. Because we want this to be as interactive and enjoyable for you as possible. So you're not here just to listen to people talk to you. We want to have a discussion, talk back and forth about these important issues. Well, I'm Peter French. I'm the director of the Lincoln Center, and what you're going to hear from today are some Lincoln professors and Lincoln fellows who are professors at Arizona State University, and they are going to discuss with you some very, very interesting aspects of the concept of cheating. We're going to start off, and I'm not going to take a whole lot of time to do this, but I'm going to start off by introducing to you Sharon Bramlett Solomon. She's a Lincoln Fellow for Media and Culture, and for me to do this right, I got to put my glasses on. She's in the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, where she's an associate professor of journalism and mass communication. Her professional background includes many years in newspaper reporting, public relations, and radio advertising sales. She formerly worked as a reporter for the Memphis Commercial Appeal and the Louisville Courier-Journal. Those are newspapers in those cities. Her research focuses on race, gender, and class representation and its effects in the U.S. media and in the criminal justice system. And she's going to talk to you about cheating, minorities in media. Welcome, Sharon Bramlett Solomon.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. It is a pleasure to be here. I want to start off by telling you just straight off the cuff that I have just a couple of theses that I want to advance before I show you just the black doll test, colorism. Some of you had homework. How many of you saw the black doll test? Okay, good. So I'm just a brief preview. I think it's just 1 minute of it to show you what it is. But let me start off by saying a couple of things. First of all, I want to say that my topic today is cheating, local TV news, colorism, and crime punishment. And I'm going to talk about how they intercept. Again, cheating, local TV news, colorism, and crime punishment. My premise is, first and foremost, I think, that it is local TV news that is a driving force in constructing our ideas and our attitudes and our public policy about race in America. Secondly, it is local TV news, not national news that I'm talking about, local television news all across the country that's making race a central, divisive component of American life, and that is cultivating misperceptions and prejudices. Third, colorism, which many of you now know about that you may not have known about from the beginning. How many of you didn't know about colorism from the beginning? If you didn't know colorism before I introduced you to that topic, raise your hand. Okay, so you were pretty much informed about colorism. Some of you I still don't know what it is. Okay, and then colorism, which is a subset of racism, is perpetuated, copied, reproduced, and maintained in media images. Now today in this conversation, very briefly, I'm going to be talking about local TV news, and then I'm going to be talking about its effect on crime outcome, punishment, but across media, colorism is pervasive. And then finally, the point I want to make in all of this is that local TV news images of people of color, the populations of color, particularly brown and black males, contribute to unfavorable, negative public opinion about them as a menace to society, as criminal or potential criminals, as problem people who are up to no good, and as those who cannot be trusted. So I want to just quickly show this. It's a 1-minute video on the Black Doll contest, Black Doll test. It is just talks about how colorism is indigenous in our culture, and it just it's been tested since Brown versus Board of Education. Recently, a young girl did another test. Many people are doing the Black Doll test, where the preference, of course, of light over dark complexion. Let's see if this worked, as Kent said it would. One more? Okay, hold up. See, I don't like that.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you liked best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one.
I'm killing.
This one.
That one?
This one. I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
She's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll.
Do I need to hit it again to get it off, Kent? Okay. Wait, no, we want it off. Sorry. Okay. Just hit it, click it, click it. Okay. Okay, let me just stop it right there. The buttons don't work, so all we can do is tap. He just told me Kent, you might have to come into this. Okay, let me move on because I have little time. Okay, after Barack Obama's 2008 presidential election, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid garnered news headlines when he said that Obama's light skin played a role in the 2008 election. General Colin Powell, the former general of the U.S., also made a similar comment, and they suggested that if Barack Obama had been dark complexion, he would not be president. I asked my graduate students and undergraduates if what Colin Powell and Harry Reid had said was true, if they agreed with them, and 80% of them said that they agreed, that if Obama had been the color of Wesley Snipes or Little Wayne or Soulja Boy, he would not have been elected. Colorism is color prejudice that values and privileges light skin tone over dark skin tone. It's mostly applied to people of color who discriminate against their own ethnic group. It's embedded in American life. Colorism is perpetuated, reinforced, and maintained through our media-driven culture. It can be seen routinely when you are viewing popular American magazines, television shows, Hollywood films, music videos, runway modeling, television commercials, and advertising, print, broadcast, and online. Colorism can be traced back to U.S. slavery days when, of course, slave masters had sex with their female slaves, and sometimes male slaves, and fathered light-skinned biracial children who often were permitted to occupy the master's house and were accorded preferential treatment over their darker complexion counterparts. The light complexion slaves commonly worked in the big house, in the master's house, mostly were his children, and they worked as domestics while the darker complexion slaves worked outside and did the labor in the fields, much more physical labor. So the concept of whiteness and its ideology of white superiority and black inferiority is the historical root of colorism. Whiteness became all that was associated with that which was considered pure, innocent, virtuous, clean, beautiful, while blackness became identified with all that was sinful, lowly, ugly, dangerous, and morally dark. Social constructions reinforce this ideology, such as angel food cake, devil's food cake, white lies, but Black Monday. And for generations, of course, on television, we all know that the good guys wear what kind of hats? See, I can tell you're young. You haven't watched as much television as some of the older people. Historically, the good guys wore white hats, yes, and you could tell who the good guys were by their hats, okay? Of course, you've heard about the big stories of cheating in the news. Janet Cook goes all the way back to Jason Blair, Stephen Glass case. Rupert Murdoch, News of the World, folded because of cheating, ethical lapses in the paper's behavior. These are the gross examples. Obtaining the cell phones of a young dead child, teenager, and hacking into it. These are gross instances of cheating. But the day-to-day cheating, you hear and you know so little about. Journalism has been called the heart of American democracy, and the Founding Fathers, of course, have always had an ideal for journalism to serve as the watchdog of societies. And the press has always been expected to serve the interests of the public. Journalists advocate the need to be truthful, accurate, fair, doing the right things. They have journalism codes of ethics. But there's always been a gap, always, between the ethical ideals of the press and the actual practice. For example, research has long noted the inadequacy and the lack of social responsibility in press coverage of race, social class, and gender issues. Yet the press, at least in theory, is expected to be socially responsible for the entire society. In 21st century America, the reverence for light skin continues to afflict heavy social, emotional costs. Colorism is projected and, as I said, and reproduced throughout media life. The breadth of the studies shows that Eurocentric features and, of course, and the preference for light over dark skin rules that it is always better to be lighter. And there's a growing body of evidence on how colorism is inflected in the U.S. media. Among the various cultural and social forces in society, colorism is most pervasive on television because although we have media, social media ruling, digital age, and we have Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Foursquare, okay? We have all of the social media that you know about and you use. Television still is the medium that tells most of the story most of the time for all of us across age and across race. So television is still very powerful. But while television is of course, a powerful purveyor of cultural images, it is local TV news that has the most direct impact on communities and individuals throughout the society. What's conveyed in local television becomes our window for the world. It becomes part of our social experience and serves as a basis for social judgments. Of course, crime stories constitute a major portion of local TV news. In some markets, crime stories, crime coverage constitutes 70% of the stories that are told on local news. One of the earliest investigations of race in local news was done by a media scholar named Robert Inman. He did it in 1992. He studied local news in Chicago. And he found, especially in the evening and the night news, he found significant differences in how white and black crime suspects were depicted in the news. Black suspects, he found just by content analyzing the news, black suspects were more likely than white suspects to be in handcuffs, photographed in handcuffs, portrayed in handcuffs, also in jail clothes, also held by police, and then also restrained and by police, and then finally most likely to be in unnamed mugshot. A mugshot is a little picture that you see on TV, usually of criminals, that's just taken generally in the arrest stages of the system, of the justice system. Robert Inman asserts that exposure over time to local TV news presents TV viewers, with an accumulation of images that make African Americans appear consistently threatening to society and dangerous. These depictions, Inman says, cultivate stereotypes of the dangerous black male. Now, I got a number of studies that I'm going through. I just want to tell you just about a couple more. Another one, Travis, Dixon, and Lentz in 2000 published studies that looked at race in LA, Los Angeles. Remember, Inman looked at Chicago, so we have consistent researchers looking at, urban areas, large markets, and seeing and investigating how TV portrays crime suspects in news. And the Dixon and Lentz study of LA found that local TV news systematically misrepresented African Americans as the perpetrators of crime, and whites as the victims of crime. They examined the portrayals of blacks and whites on TV newscasts and found that blacks were overrepresented as the perpetrators in the local area, 37% compared to the actual arrest of African Americans, 21%. And they were underrepresented as victims, 23% compared to the actual crime reports of 30%. So these findings are very stark in contrast to the ways as which whites and blacks are portrayed. Whites on TV were represented as perpetrators 19%, but in actual arrests, they were 28%. And they were overrepresented as victims, 43%, but in actual arrest papers, 13%. So there have been differences across race, and researchers have uncovered them. One final study I want to share with you is the Villanova University study, and it is a massive study, because this is the first time that researchers actually looked at colorism among women suspects. The Villanova researchers found that light-skinned women were sentenced to approximately 12% less time behind bars than their darker-skinned counterparts. And light-complexioned women actually served 11% less time than their darker-skinned counterpart. And this is a study where the researchers examined 12,158 cases that go back to 2005. So it's a huge database looking at African-American women in prison in North Carolina. Okay? And of course, the gist is that lighter skin gives you more lenient sentencing. Lighter skin can also make you look less death-worthy than darker skin. Capital punishment cases show that the darker the suspect, the more likely in capital punishment cases for that person to get the death penalty. All things being equal, the same crime, the same background, you can look more death-worthy by having darker complexions. So what this all is saying is that colorism, of course, is a part of all of our social institutions. And something that I didn't tell you, that among African Americans especially, and Latino Americans, where light is much more part of the phenomena, it can dictate who's educated, who marries whom, who's more likely to be successful in work and occupations and professionalism. So colorism is all around, and just because some of you may not have heard about it, it is certainly a problem in the society. Finally, in the recent case of George Zimmerman and fatally shooting Trayvon Martin that you may have heard about, part of the allegation against Zimmerman is that he may have made a hair-trigger assumption that blackmail in his neighborhood equaled up to no good. Meanwhile, in courtrooms and newsrooms across the nation, colorism is not discussed, but should raise ethical issues and ethical concerns when it intersects with local TV news. While racism may get headlines, and we may hear talk about how racism poisons the criminal justice system and sending more African Americans than whites to jail, how racism pervades sentencing, if Caucasians have cocaine, you're given far less sentences than in cases where they call it's crack in urban communities, and African Americans and Hispanic Americans, brown and black people are given much more jail time. But there is little and hardly ever any mention about colorism. It's time, however, for colorism to be taken seriously because, of course, it can have very dangerous social consequences. The American press so far has not recognized colorism as a pernicious social problem that deserves press attention and press social responsibility. So what can be done about TV news cheating the public out of having an accurate portrayal of Americans of color? And in fact, being fair to the entire society and giving you the whole story. A couple of things. Local TV news managers must rethink their overwhelming reliance, first of all, on crime coverage. It is the driving force in local TV news. And they need to show the full array of American society if they can. They need to show images, for example, of young brown and black males in everyday life, and not simply just in criminal elements. But outside of crime, it is generally professional athletes or celebrities for people of color who are the object of the local news. And finally, you and I as media consumers, we have to play a role in voicing our feedback and demanding social responsibility of the press, because the status quo is just simply unacceptable and dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And you're going to have an opportunity to ask her questions and discuss some of these issues with her as we move along later in the program. But right now, I'm going to introduce to you another Lincoln Fellow. He's a Lincoln Fellow for Ethics in Sustainable Education and Synthetic Reality. These titles that these guys get who work for us are amazing. If you go to our website, you'll just peruse the titles and you'll be surprised at where they come up with these things. But anyway, I'm going to introduce to you John Carter McKnight. He's also a fellow of the Center for Games and Impact and the director of the Lincoln Center's Starship Culture program. He's been an adjunct professor of law at ASU's Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law and a Science Foundation Arizona Fellow. He was a corporate finance attorney until he saw the light, specializing in initial public offerings, and particularly initial public offerings of high-tech firms. And he is the first executive director of the Mars Society and a member of the board of directors of the Space Frontier Foundation. Let me introduce to you John Carter McKnight, and he's going to talk about cheating in video games. And I assume many of you, all of you, have been involved in playing video games once in a while? How many? The rest of you are cheating, and we'll get to that later on in the program. Okay, John Carter McKnight.
Morning, everybody. Today, you're going to hear about some of the most important issues facing us: race relations, crime and punishment, war and peace. So I'm up here talking about video games. Who cares? There's a couple answers to that one. First one is, studies have shown that people who cheat in video games cheat in other stuff and steal stuff from hotels more than other people and do all kinds of other bad things. Another one is, one of the things we don't know is whether, really, if you behave not so great in games or online, you do the same in the rest of your life. I've got friends who say, I'm not really a racist, foul-mouthed jackass. I just play one on Xbox Live. Might be true, might not be true. We just don't know yet. Another one is, a lot of the issues around cheating in video games go to our relationship with our stuff and our relationship with the people who make our stuff. And these are some really important issues in how we deal with changing technologies. We ask people who play games, what is cheating? When do you cheat? What's that all about? It usually breaks down into 5 categories. First one is, I cheat because I'm stuck. Second one is, I cheat because I want to fast forward. Third one is, I cheat because I'm a jackass. Fourth one is some creative kind of stuff. So we're going to talk through those one at a time, kind of explore what's going on there. First one, biggest reason why people say they cheat in video games is because they get stuck. Now, if you think about it, it's kind of weird. Because like if I'm reading a book and I get to something I don't understand, I might go to a dictionary and look up a word. I might ask them, hey, what's going on here? And that's what you people in school call learning. But if I'm in a video game and I come to something I don't know how to do, and I go to a walkthrough online or I ask my buddies, that's cheating. Does that make any sense? I mean, we're talking about our playtime here. It's not the SATs. But somehow we have this sense that if you go to a walkthrough or if you use some other resource to help explain stuff in a game that you don't understand, that's cheating, and that makes you a bad person. And that's kind of a strange concept. There's something in there about how we think about play and how we think about rules about play that we're not really sure of how that works. And again, you got to think about this. It's not like, most people when you think about cheating in games is breaking the rules, right? But if you use a walkthrough, you're not breaking the rules. You're playing the game exactly the way it's supposed to be played. You're just getting a little help along the way. So now why is that supposed to be a bad thing? Next one is fast forwarding. A lot of games won't let you skip ahead, and particularly back in the old days, you couldn't save games just anywhere you wanted. And another thing, even in massively multiplayer online games today, like World of Warcraft, you can't play with people of different levels. So I was talking to a friend of mine a couple days ago, and she said, hey, Miss Pandaria just came out in World of Warcraft. I'd love to play with you. Why don't you come play on my server? And I'm like, do I really want to spend another couple weeks leveling a new character all the way to 85 just so I can play with my friend on her server? I thought, one of my students is like the king of power leveling. And when we taught World of Warcraft in class, he got his character up to level cap in like a week. So maybe if I slip him $100, he could level a character for me and save me some time. Now that's cheating. That's clearly cheating, because I'm not playing the game. I'm paying somebody else to do it for me. I didn't. Trust me. Never do anything like that. But all I want to do is play with my buddy. And the game won't let me, so I got to do a workaround. So yeah, if I did that, I'd be cheating. I'd be a bad person. But all I'm trying to do is fix something that's broken in the game, right? So that I can play with my friend. Now, if I did that, paying somebody else to play for me, if I paid somebody else to go buy in-game money from them, gold farming, which is a big deal in a lot of games, one, it's against the rules of the game, and I could get banned from the game. Two, a lot of other players really don't like gold farmers, people who go into a game and just do something over and over and over and over and over again to make in-game currency that they then sell for cash to somebody else. But when I was talking about, the first time I was talking about this to a friend of mine, she said, well, I use World of Warcraft as a professional thing. It's like for people who don't want to get outside in the sun and play golf, we hang out indoors and play World of Warcraft together. It's like a community building thing. But I want the people in my company to be able to have the fun of raiding at the end of the game. I don't want to have them spend a couple weeks leveling up just to get there. So yeah, I pay somebody in another country that might be halfway around the world to level my character, and so they can go and play. And that's a problem because the game doesn't let me. But then, some games have cash shops where you can, in the game, for real money, buy stuff that makes you a better player. But that's not cheating. So in one case, I'm paying somebody, halfway around the world to do something, and that's bad. But if I pay the company to do it, I'm a good person. Is that really the way we want to make our moral decisions about who we are and how we think about ourselves? Okay, next reason is playing God. Sometimes it's fun just to go out and destroy everything, right? So what I might do if I was doing that is use a cheat code or a hack to give me, say, unlimited health or unlimited ammo. So I can just go and lay waste to stuff. And if I'm playing a game, and my goal in playing the game is to have fun, and being invincible is fun, who am I cheating? Who am I cheating if I enter a cheat code that gives me all kinds of stuff? Well, I'm not playing the game the way it's supposed to be played. Okay. Is that a moral issue? Or is that just, I like my rules better than the game's rules? And when you Google cheating in video games online, which I had occasion to do, the number one thing that comes up is cheat codes. Now, cheat codes are strange, because there's something that's actually built into the game by the designers of the game. And I don't know if there's any old school gamers in the house, but if there are, you might recognize the Konami code, which is the great granddaddy of all cheat codes. And what a cheat code is, for some of the older folks in back, is you can enter a combination of button punches that give you goodies. Some of those are things like big head mode, which give you a big head. That's cheating? They can also do stuff like give you unlimited health, unlimited ammo, and okay, that's not the way the game's supposed to be played, so that's probably cheating. But who am I cheating? It's not really clear. Okay. Now, if I'm doing that in a solo player game, I'm just having fun, and okay, you know, I might not be a moral, upstanding person because I'm not suffering through the misery of a game being really hard. Maybe it's cheating, maybe it isn't. Now, clearly, if I'm doing that in a multiplayer game, I'm the next category, being a jerk. Now, I kind of wish the videos were working, because one of the ones I have here is cheat codes in real life. And it shows two guys running around in the fields with guns, and one of them goes up and enters unlimited ammo. And then he enters aimbot. And so he's walking along, he's just like, headshot, 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 and everybody else is dying around him. Then he runs into another guy with unlimited ammo, and they just stand there firing at each other from like 2 feet away until they run out of ammo, and then they both kind of rage quit the game and go on. So, okay, being a jerk is bad. But is it cheating, or is it something else? Like, if I'm playing the game by the rules, and I'm just, you know, going in and I'm ganking noobs, which is kind of fun, I'm playing the game by the rules. I might be making your life miserable, but, you know, that's part of the game. But, you know, if I use a hack or a mod to give me, you know, to do aimbot or give me unlimited ammo, well, then I'm cheating to make your life miserable. And that's probably two kinds of bad, probably. And that one kind of shades into the next sort of thing, which is, and one of the things that we've seen in games and studies of how players deal with games is, particularly in game communities where the players can do something about it. You know, where they can not just, you know, file one of those stupid reports that probably nothing ever gets done with them, but where they can actually, like, go back and gank and camp somebody who is trying to cheat. It makes for a better game community. And those games where the players can get together and say, no, we're not going to deal with that. We're going to come down on you. You get a strong, healthy game community. People talk less trash, and it's sort of a better space. So if I'm going into a game and I'm using aimbot and I get squashed, and you all kind of organize and get together and decide, hey, we don't want to play like that, am I cheating, or am I doing a public service by making your lives better by getting together and pushing me out of the game? Not really clear. And this is one that shades into the next step, which is creativity. And this is the one that isn't talked, how many of you actually read those articles? Don't lie, I don't really care. Anybody read the articles? A couple of you, okay. There's a researcher wrote a really, really good book on cheating in video games called Cheating in Video Games. And she interviewed a lot of players, and she came up with those top 4 reasons. Playing God, fast forwarding, getting help, and being a jerk. But there's one that she didn't cover, which is kind of interesting. I think this is the one that really goes directly to some new issues about how we deal with technology, and that's creativity. And some companies, some games are good with this, and some aren't. There's kind of a view among some game companies that if you're not playing the game they made for you the way they want you to play it, you're a bad person. Use only as directed. And use only as directed is probably a good idea if you're talking about some kind of prescription medication. If you're talking about a video game, why should I use only as directed? Who are you to tell me how I'm going to play the game? And even for you really, really old school gamers out there who haven't played a lot of video games, probably at some point you played Monopoly and you had house rules. Because let's face it, the rules of Monopoly are really freaking boring. It's not a great game. So you probably did a little something to spice it up and make it a better game. Now, is that cheating, or is that you're a better game designer than the people who made Monopoly in 1930? For those of you who played World of Warcraft or most other MMOs, the user interface that comes with those things is kind of nasty. It's not really helpful, right? So what some game companies do is they say, okay, you can go out there and play with it and maybe make something better. And particularly in the case of World of Warcraft, they've encouraged users to go out and build modifications to the user interface that make it more useful. Now, one of the things this does is it teaches programming skills. It teaches you that you own your stuff and some other company doesn't own your stuff, so you can do with it what you want to make it more useful to you. And that's probably a better way of our dealing with stuff than just, here, you bought it, use it my way, or you're a bad person. Some companies don't agree with that approach. Now, there's some other ways that you can interfere with playing a game. We talked a little bit about hacks, and a hack is you break into the code and you do something nasty to it. It's one little while back in World of Warcraft where some level 1 character went into one of the big capital cities and just with one click killed 1,000 people. And made their day kind of bad for a few minutes, right? That's a hack. Probably not a good idea. But there's another case of playing the game entirely by the rules that probably is cheating, and it's botting. And botting is where you create a program that plays the game for you. Now, why would anybody do that? And you see this in cartoons a lot. Why would you pay other people to play so you don't have to play even though you're paying for the game that you're playing already? But there's a lot of good reasons for botting. Some of it is, I want to make some extra money, I want to sell my resources. In some games, though, it's actually kind of a useful part of the game. Anybody here play EVE Online? Whoa, excellent. Okay, brutally hard game. It's basically a spaceship game where you're in this universe and you mine for stuff and you get killed all the time. But economic resources matter a lot. So what a lot of people do, and it's against the rules, is set up a program that'll go out and do mining for you, because otherwise you're sitting at your computer all night watching your spaceship's lasers cut into an asteroid to get metal that slowly goes into your cargo hold, and if you've got any kind of life at all, you've probably got something better to do. So you create a program that, it runs, it does the mining while you're off, watching YouTube videos or something really, really socially productive. But that's illegal. And by the term, you're not going to go to jail for it, but it's against the terms of the game, and if you get caught, you can get banned from the game. But what are you doing in botting? You're playing the game exactly the way the designers designed it for. The only difference is you're not actually sitting there watching it happen. So what we're starting to see from these cases is some really interesting ideas about what's good and bad in the world of video games specifically, but also in how we deal with our stuff. And these all kind of fall into the category of there's a way you're supposed to use your things. And if you don't use your things the way you're supposed to use your things, you're a bad person. But there's another way of looking at it, which falls under this creativity thing, and that's if you don't use your stuff the way the designers want you to use your stuff, you're taking responsibility for your life. You're learning some useful skills. You're saying, I'm not going to be dictated to by some company somewhere when I paid them $60, $80, so that I can have fun. I want to have fun the way I want to have fun. I bought your game, you got your money, shut up and go away. And I'm going to take charge of my stuff and use it the way I want to. And some of the other things that fall into creativity come up in a lot of other fields. One of those that I want to end on is machinima, which is using a game completely not the way the designers wanted. So instead of playing some game where you're trying to, win or gank 14-year-olds or whatever, you're making a movie. You're making real cinema just with the tools of the game. And some of this stuff is incredibly gorgeous. And hopefully if this works, I'll end on something that's not gorgeous, but kind of stupid, which is fun. And you see this in other fields. In some cases, it's one of the really most important issues of how we deal with our stuff. And that's remix, something called remix. And in music, it's taking some other people's stuff, sampling it, putting in your own creativity, and creating some entirely new work of art. Now, in most of the way we've viewed the world, we've viewed creativity for 1,000 years, that's like the highest art. We were talking before we started about Shakespeare. And, Shakespeare is like the greatest literary figure in the English language. And he did not invent his plots. He remixed them. He took stuff that was around in his time that other people had written, that was playing in other theaters. He took some old folk stories. He took, stories he'd heard elsewhere, mixed them together, added in his creativity, and became the greatest writer in the English language. Now, when we do that with music, we're copyright violators. And we can go to jail. There's federal law against using other people's copyrighted stuff in music, in movies, in any kind of creative production. And if those laws had applied in Shakespeare's time, we wouldn't have Shakespeare. That might be a problem. So one of the things this all adds up to is, when we think about cheating in video games, we can say, oh yeah, I'm a bad person. Or we could say, I'm taking charge of my stuff. I'm not going to be dictated to by people who made things. I'm not going to be dictated to by corporations who are just out to make sure that they squeeze every last buck out of me. But I'm going to engage with my tech. I'm going to understand it. I'm going to work with it. I'm going to break it open. I'm going to remix it. I'm going to make something new. I'm going to create some art. Or I'm going to gang 14-year-olds. Come on, let's be honest. But still, it's a way of taking responsibility for ourselves and for our tech. And maybe that's cheating. Maybe that makes us bad. But maybe it's a way of really asserting our power and controlling our lives. Anybody got any questions? Yes?
Have you noticed a trend in other professions that people who are more prone to cheating, like business, law, where in situations where in their career they would have to find workarounds to issues?
What an excellent question. Okay, the question, if you didn't hear it, was, are there cases in other professions where you have to find a workaround? The rules say you got to do something a certain way and it doesn't really work for you. You got to come up with something else. It's an excellent question. The quick answer is, yeah, it's innovation, right? It's what Apple does, right? They say, 10 years ago, phones kind of suck, right? You can make phone calls with them. You've got this little gray screen. It's hard to text. Not real useful. But instead of saying, oh, we're just stuck with this terrible technology and maybe we can make it a little cheaper or something, what Apple did was say, we're going to break the whole idea open. We're going to take some ideas from here, some ideas from there. We're going to remix them, totally reinvent the phone, and come up with something new that's a lot more useful. And what business innovation really is all about is saying, the way the rules work right now kind of sucks. We can't do the things we want to do. So let's come up with some new product, some new service, some way of dealing with the world to make it a little better. The other side of that, of course, is, these banking regulations. They're kind of a pain in the ass, and if we just stole a little here and stole a little there and floated some money, who's going to notice a housing crisis or two, right? That didn't work so well. So there are two sides of this. And I'm up here kind of making the case for, yay cheating in video games because we can take ownership of our stuff. But where the line is between business innovation and stealing money and destroying the American economy, kind of a hard, fine line. Anybody else?
Yeah. With the game cards where you buy in-game money for real money, is there anything unethical about the company selling you these cards to be able to actually play the game for extra money? You bought the game, you're not able to just play it directly out of the box.
Beautiful question, beautiful question. It also applies to games where on release day, there's downloadable content you can buy. It's like, okay, if I paid $65 on day one for my game, you're telling me I gotta pay $15 for stuff that you could have given me? Is there any ethical question around that? The question is there any ethical issue around companies that sell you game cards for time or sell you other stuff after you've already bought their game? And, the short answer is, well, they can do whatever they want. It's their game. Is it obnoxious? Yeah, it's obnoxious. Absolutely. Is it unethical? Probably not. Anybody else? Yeah. Great question. The question is, are there new ideas? Or is everything we do remix? Is everything just kind of out there and we're taking old bits and putting them together in new ways? I think most of what we do is remix. You know, most of the things we come across in life are just somebody's own twist or some little new improvement on something that's been done before. There is some stuff that's just flat out new that nobody's ever thought of. But not a lot, because even if you look at the weirdest, wildest ideas out there, a lot of them, you know, like I think you're getting at, have origins way back in time. You heard that I do a bunch of space exploration stuff. And, you know, you'd think probably there's nothing more kind of new in the world than, like, shooting a rocket to the moon with somebody inside it. But Jules Verne, a science fiction writer, wrote a story about guys getting shot out of a cannon to the moon in the late 1800s. And it goes back to ideas, even in fiction in ancient Greek times, about people, you know, taking chariots to the moon. Old idea, new way of implementing it. So I think for the most part, most of what we do is remix. We're just in a really weird situation now with our technology that the companies that make it want us to not do that. There's a story that a law professor tells about the composer John Philip Sousa, who wrote a bunch of patriotic marches and stuff. And around 1900, he testified before Congress right when recorded music was coming out for the first time. And he said, this new technology is going to suck. But he had a really good point. And he said, you know, now if you go out to the street, in a small town, there's people hanging out on the street corner and singing. You know, or what they do for entertainment at night is play piano, play their own music. And they own it, and they do it, and they make it for themselves. You know, and it may not be epic world quality, but you own it. And he said, this recorded music stuff that's coming along, that's going to take that away from us. Because instead of our playing the piano, we're going to listen to the best people in the world playing the piano. Instead of our making up songs and singing them to our friends, we're going to pay some celebrity to do that for us. And we're going to, we're going to lose the, we're going to lose the ability to create on our own, because we're just going to get out of practice to that. And, you know, he was right. For a long time, and, you know, most of us don't have anywhere near, I mean, you guys might. It might be starting to get different now. But particularly for my generation, the generation before me, nothing like the creative talent that our grandparents had, because we watched other people do stuff, and we paid other people to be creative and interesting and funny and useful and do our entertainment for us. So I think remix is a long-time part of human nature that just in the past handful of years, companies are trying to shut down so that they can own everything we do. And I think that's kind of unethical. Anybody else? Come on, you know you want to. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, John. We'll have him back later. Keep your questions, and we'll have more time later for questions from John about video games and their role in our lives, and particularly your lives, and also the ethics of cheating in them. But for now, we're ready to take our break, and again, I want to tell you, there are 2 stations out in the lobby with refreshments. I'm told, please restrict yourself to 2 cookies, because otherwise it would be cheating. And the restrooms are on either side outside in the lobby. So we'll be back in 15 minutes. We're now going to move to something that is global in its cheating aspects, and also national. Our speaker is going to be Daniel Rothenberg. He is the Lincoln Fellow for Ethics and International Human Rights Law. He's a professor of practice and executive director of the Center for Law and Global Affairs and the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at ASU. He's an expert in international human rights and treaties, and he just returned, and I mean just returned, from being deep in the Congo. I don't know if he's going to mention anything about the Congo, but he's been there on issues regarding international rights and the mining industry. He has designed and managed rule of law projects in Afghanistan and Iraq and throughout Latin America. And he's aided indigenous peoples in using international legal remedies, supported gender justice, and collected and analyzed thousands of first-person narratives from victims of severe human rights violations around the world. And just as a side note, and you can go on our website and read this story, in 2007, he tells a story about what was one of his visits to Iraq, although it's true that for many times, he's been driven on the airport road to Baghdad, which, if some of you know, is aptly named the Highway of Death. So he has been there where the action is, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Daniel Rothenberg.
Thanks. Hello. Well, thanks so much for coming to this event on cheating. So what Peter was mentioning is true. I just got back on Sunday from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it's a very long trip. It took like maybe 3.5 days actually to get back over roads and then planes and stuck in airports. But what I'm going to talk with you about today is cheating in war, more specifically a question about whether what's going on today with the wars that have defined essentially your lives, I could say your adult lives, but really the lives during which time you've been paying attention to the news, assuming you do. And you know, I don't know everybody's age here, but this has been a nation in a state of war since 2001. And that, I don't know what, let's see, how many of you are, say, between the ages of 13 and 16? Okay, so your lives are lives that have been lived in a state of war. And I don't know how many of you feel as if you're children of war, or you're people who've grown up in this kind of condition, if that's a big part of your lives. So if you're individuals who have close family members, parents or uncles or aunts or any kind of close family members who've served, you might feel the impact of war, particularly if they were killed or wounded. But in the event with our voluntary military that you're not in that category, so you're part of the larger citizenry that mainly knows these wars through television, through YouTube clips maybe, through the news of any various kinds, it makes the war a somewhat abstract thing. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'd certainly be pleased to entertain questions from you about how you feel about being essentially children of war, a war generation. But I want to talk with you about an element of these wars, and by these wars I mean the war in Afghanistan, currently raging, the war that began the first of the two wars, the other war being Iraq, and sort of was less significant in terms of U.S. expenditure of resources, and is now on the front page. And then, so the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. And so, what you may not be thinking about when you think about these wars is what they cost. Wars are incredibly costly. They're obviously costly in terms of human life. People put their lives at risk. They die in war. They get wounded in war. But these have also been wars that have been enormously expensive in terms of money. And by money, it's really your money, in that it is our government's expenditures, and you essentially pay them. And for these wars, you really pay them. I don't know can you hear me if I'm here? All right, so I'll do some back and forth between. So I just want to show you a website. I gave this website to you on the, let's see. Hold on a second, try this. Yeah, okay, here we go. So if you wondered, what do these wars cost? So this is the single dollar number. This is the $10 number. You get this, the $100 number. So this is the $1 million number. That's the $1 trillion number. So these wars haven't cost millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions or thousands of millions or tens of thousands of millions or hundreds of thousands of millions. They've cost millions of millions in dollars. And I checked out this website early this morning when I was putting together some thoughts. And since around 7 in the morning, the amount of money that you owe for these wars has gone up $50 million. And somebody can try to stop us now. So write this number down, somebody. And we will see at the end of this conversation how many more millions you now owe for these two wars. And when I say you, I really mean you, because these are wars that have been managed largely on borrowed money. And so the question about cheating and fairness that I'm offering to you is, to what degree is the United States government borrowing money that you will pay back for these wars something that is fair? And if it's not fair, why isn't it fair? And if it's a form of cheating, what form of cheating, and who's cheated? And these are quite real questions, even if they seem abstract. So even if the war seems abstract, even if these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq haven't affected you and your families directly, I guarantee will affect you directly, and it will affect you directly, and it is affecting you directly, even if you haven't sort of thought that through, because this is money that has to be paid, and there are not that many people that pay. The people who pay the borrowed money of the United States government is the future generations of taxpayers and workers, and that is you. So, I have a question for you, which is, so if we want to understand what the impact of these wars is in terms of a question of cheating or not cheating, I sort of thought we'd have a few different questions. So one question is, does the government have a responsibility to pay for the wars that it wages as they occur? Which is exactly not what's happened in the last decade of the state of war that you've grown up in. And if not, is there some sort of obligation that the government has to consult with you or to somehow include you, who are paying the bills or will pay the bills pretty soon, in this process? And I thought I would bring up a couple of cases that might be similar to this general situation, and they were sort of a thought experiment of how to process this question. This is, by any measure, this is a completely overwhelming concept, right? I don't know if you've ever held $100 in ones, say, but it's a fair amount of money. And $1,000 in ones is a lot of money, and $1 million in ones is a lot of money. Frankly, $1 million in hundreds is a fair amount of money. $1 trillion, or rather $1.385 trillion, is a surreal sum of money. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about actually the complexity of moving that sort of money around physically, because part of the fighting of these wars has been to physically cart around billions of dollars in cash. But now let's talk about a few cases. So I am going to offer you case number one. So I'm going to talk about the family as a unit, right? So how would you feel if your parents, and I'm just going to use the term parents, it could be any other guardian, grandparents, whoever you live with, uncles, siblings. So if they went on a vacation, a really expensive round-the-world vacation, cost $100,000, flying first class from one place to another, staying in fancy hotels, living it up, drinking champagne, cost $100,000 for their vacation, and they borrowed the money and set it up so that each of you would have to pay. How would you feel? Would you feel that that was fair? Would you feel that it was some form of cheating? Was it wrong? And they didn't consult you because you were younger and you were under their care. They just set it up so that they had a really nice time. And that's one case to think about. And I saw some people shaking their heads, so there might be a tendency to feel that that's fundamentally unfair. So that'll bring us to case number two. So case number two, be a little bit more complicated maybe ethically, which is imagine that a parent, and again, I'll just use the term parent. It's your guardian. It could be grandparent, sibling. So your parent needs an expensive surgery, $2 million. And there are surgeries and aftercare that could cost that. So $2 million. And they get this surgery, and then they pass on the debt to you and your siblings. The debt is so large that you're going to be paying that debt out for 30 or 40 years. And while you pay out that debt, you're not going to be able maybe to afford college, or maybe the college you want, or you're not going to be able to afford your own vacations, or you're not going to be able to afford to buy a house. All these things you might want to do, you're going to forego because you have been burdened or taken on the debt of the parent's surgery. So that's a little bit of a different case, right? Because a vacation might sound a little, something more voluntary, something more pleasurable, something for which you wouldn't necessarily take on the burdens. But maybe life-saving surgery, you would feel like it would be reasonable to take on those burdens. Well, then you think, what if the chance of the surgery being successful was 20%, 10%, 5%? At what point would it be a burden that you would take on? What if it was cosmetic surgery? What if it wasn't life-saving surgery at all? So I leave you with those cases to think about because, the national economy is not necessarily all that different in some respects than your economy or your family's economy. And the nation is, at least in two ways, really quite similar to a family. It's similar in that it's a network of social relations, of trust, and of understandings and agreements. So to some degree, even just as families are dysfunctional, nations are dysfunctional, but there's some sort of glue that holds it together that involves relationships. And the financial component is part of those relationships. And another thing that might make it similar, especially for people your age, is that a nation, like a family, is similarly structured in that those who make the primary decisions don't necessarily consult those impacted by the decisions. So your guardians and your parents may make decisions all the time that burden you with their outcomes, and you're not necessarily consulted. Now, in a democracy, we might argue that there is a need and a demand, a moral demand for consultation. And this is the question for you. To what degree should you be consulted? I mean, you were actually quite young at the stage when these debts were initially taken on, but they really are your debts. You will pay them. And there are things you may want, like new roads or better schools or cheaper health care or all sorts of things that you might desire, national parks that are taken care of, funding for scientific experiments to improve health, student loan coverage, all the things you might care about will not be affordable because someone's got to pay this, and that someone is you and your colleagues. So it isn't only that the wars have been so expensive it's difficult for us to process them. It's also that they haven't necessarily been efficient. And by inefficient, I actually mean that they are strangely, they have components, surreal components in their practice. And as somebody, I worked in Iraq from 2004 to 2010, and in Afghanistan from around 2004 to 2007. I traveled there a lot. And it's difficult to convey some of the more surreal components of what the life on the ground in both of those countries was. And I'll give you an example. The wars cost a lot of money. So when the very brutal government of Saddam Hussein was overthrown in the spring of 2003, the US government stepped in with huge amounts of resources, but there weren't any banks. So now if you want money, you go to a bank machine and you put your card and you get money. But imagine that there were no banks that functioned. So where was the money that you needed to pay for things? It was flown in big planes. And it wasn't like, I don't know if you've ever carried much money in your pockets, but it wasn't the amounts of money you could carry in pockets. Over this period of time, $12 billion in $100 bills was flown in, plane after plane, into Baghdad. Billions of dollars. In 2003 alone, the US flew in 363 tons of $100 bills. That's 726,000 pounds of $100 bills. That would fill this many times over, this theater, with $100 bills. I mean, think how pleased you are to have a couple of them. It would fill this room. They used to fly planes into the Baghdad International Airport with pallets, shipping pallets, full of shrink-wrapped packages of $100 bills. One plane brought in $2 billion of $100 bills. And the money was so heavy that they would carry it, and their forklifts would come to the airport and pick up big pallets full of $100 bills and take them to waiting trucks. And people would have to load up just the weight of billions of dollars of US currency was a key part of the conflict. It's what partly led to this. And there was no safe place to store the money. So every office that was dealing with money would have a little safe. Or sometimes there wouldn't even be a safe, so money would be just put in a closet. So imagine, you'd open your closet, it would be shrink-wrapped $100 bills to, where you'd normally have clothes. You'd have millions and millions of dollars in shrink-wrapped bills. And so think to yourself, if you were able to access any of that money, think how easy it would be to see some of that disappear. And you'd think, well, maybe some of it disappeared. Well, not some of it disappeared. Billions and billions of dollars of US taxpayer money in cash for which there is no accounting disappeared in Iraq in the early years of the conflict. And in some cases, there were hundreds of thousands of dollars that just disappeared from under someone's desk or from in a storage unit. It's difficult to conceive of just how much money this was, and it's difficult to process how this money would be managed, and it raises a new component of that question, which is, if you think it's fair to take on this sort of debt, or for the government to take on this debt in your behalf, it may seem even less reasonable if the money was managed in the way that a lot of this money was managed. And I'll quote, I included it for those who checked the website, a video where the chair of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, looking into the way in which the budgets were managed in both of these conflicts, said, "Who in their right mind would send 363 tons of cash into a war zone?" And you might ask yourself the same question, because those tons of cash are essentially your cash, and all of it was borrowed on your future. And it raises a question that I think is worth thinking about, which I'm pushing you on, is to what degree is this fair? And I'm not talking now about whether or not these wars were wars that should have been fought. I mean, just to what degree was it right for the US government to fight these enormously expensive wars and to have you pay for them without any kind of consultation? And frankly, it's simply too late. To the degree you feel like this is unfair, this debt still exists. And as you notice, these numbers, the numbers are going up not because the debt is, more money is being borrowed, but because the interest rate on the money makes the amount borrowed go up astronomically. It's sort of like running a huge credit card balance to the degree you have credit cards. So there are billions that remain unaccounted for. And I want to leave you with sort of a thought experiment, because the current situation, it's true, there's not much that could be done about it, but it might have been managed differently. And this is a question sort of for your political education, which is, what if these wars had been fought and paid for at the same time? What if there had been a request made to the American people to say, you know what, these wars are so important, they're so necessary, in order to pay for these enormously expensive interventions, we will increase taxes during the period of the war. So 5% increase in income tax, 10% increase in income tax for the duration of the conflict. Would that have changed the willingness of Americans to have fought wars? If they had to pay for these wars, would people have been as supportive of them? And would that be a good thing? So I'll just take some questions from any and all of you. Yeah.
So it sounds like at this point, the debt accumulated from these wars is more of a luxurious vacation situation rather than a life-saving surgery?
So what do you think? That's a good question. Nobody seemed to want to pay for their parents' luxurious vacation. I just like a lot of nodding heads. So is this a case more like the luxurious vacation, or is it more like I'll just turn the question to the audience. The question was, sorry, for those who couldn't hear it, doesn't it seem like this is more like the luxurious vacation case rather than the surgery case? What do you think?
It's not the luxurious vacation because it's not something that I really wanted. I didn't have to make a decision on it. And choose to make a decision on it.
Right, so one point is to say it's like the luxurious vacation because it's something that you weren't consulted on. And frankly, you guys were really little when this all happened. Yeah.
I was under the impression that the reason that these wars were being fought, the people that they're being fought about were countryless, essentially. So fighting, invading these countries doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I may just be ignorant, and I'd like to be conformed.
Well, so it's a really big question, and in some ways I was hoping to avoid, which is to what degree was the invasion of Afghanistan and the ongoing war, if it's the U.S. government calls it a war, and the invasion of Iraq and the resulting conflict, whether these were good ideas, good policies, appropriate. I'm trying to avoid that because it's a very contentious issue that gets people up in arms in various ways, but it's related to this because in some ways, like the vacation case versus the surgery case, it's fair to say that if something is necessary, important, and crucial, that you're willing to pay for it. And maybe you're willing to take on even crushing debt in order to enable that. So I think it's related. I'd rather not try to answer whether these wars were right, but what's a question for you is whether the way the wars were managed with this debt that is on your shoulders is the right way to manage the relationship between a state and its citizens. Yeah.
I don't think the war falls in either of the two categories of luxury or necessity. So I definitely think there were parts of the war that were necessary, but $1.3 trillion seems a little excessive.
So this is an interesting question, right? So maybe it's not like case one or case two, that there are elements of the wars that were necessary, and it was the management of the money. And really, in the early stages of the conflict, hopefully someone will make a good movie about this because there was just cash. Loads of cash floating around. Cash so heavy it was hard to store safely. And lots of money was spent, and maybe it was spent in such an inefficient and maybe inappropriate way that we now are facing this sort of cost. Let me just go to this side, yeah.
Your subject includes the term human rights.
Yeah.
I haven't heard much about human rights.
Fair enough, yeah. Well, that's a good question. I ended up tailoring this particular talk on this question, but I suppose human rights is at the core of all this in that I have a sense that many of us, certainly from the ethical perspective, would feel that the wars most worth fighting are the wars that most defend and protect fundamental values like human rights. And there's a human rights argument for both the Afghan conflict and the Iraq conflict, although it's an open question whether human rights concerns are what defined US policy. And frankly, you could also raise the question that taking on debt is its own sort of human rights issue, in that to the degree that most of the money or a lot of money goes to paying down debt, it's money that can't go to other human rights concerns and other rights concerns like education, healthcare, and the like. So there's a human rights element of waging war, of spending money on war.
How is it right for governments to spend such ludicrous amounts of money that they don't even have and don't have a way to pay off for a conflict that is debatable in necessity? The people that made these decisions don't even have to deal with the consequences of these decisions.
That's exactly right. So the question, if everyone could hear that, I don't know if everyone can hear, was how is it, what was the word, how is it right? I mean, that may not be the right word. How is it right for wars to be fought that are so expensive that may not have a good reason for being waged, and those who've made the decisions to take on this debt won't be around to pay it and are not held accountable? I mean, exactly. So is this cheating in a democratic system for your government to take on enormous debts and to pass them to you?
But is this a universal thing for all generations? They left us with this debt, but did they also have debt from the previous generation before them that they had to deal with? Is this something that's just universally passed down?
So is government holding debt something that's common? The answer is yes. Do governments tend to have a fair amount of debt? Yeah, they do. The amount of, what's interesting about this particular form of debt taking is that it was, wars are very, very serious, engaging in war is a very serious decision in every sense, and nothing about what I'm talking about here, I mean to minimize the significance of what it means for a nation to go to war. But what's fascinating about this particular war is it's turned out to be, these two wars, enormously expensive, for which the vast majority of the cost has been borrowed. So I think the combination of the expense of these particular conflicts and the scope of the borrowing makes this particular decade of conflict fairly unique, or at least special and worth thinking about. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sure.
So we have this $1 trillion debt. If this money was borrowed, where are we going to get the money to pay it back?
An excellent question. Where will we get the money to pay it back? Well, a very good question. There's no simple answer to that. Yeah.
It's kind of like what he said about people not feeling the consequences of it. I know that like shortly after the country was founded, there was like a proposed amendment that when our country was considering a war, it would go to a national vote, and everyone who voted yes on the war would be included into a draft for it. Do you feel something like that in terms of like the debt and paying for it, or like would you have value?
So I would put the question to you. What do you think it would be the way in which a society that's about to engage in an incredibly expensive, complicated, costly war, what's the right way to manage that relationship? Is it to offer a tax? I mean, I'm not sure that Americans would have supported the wars if they had to be paid for as they were waged. Similarly, by no longer having a draft for the military, we have a professional military where those who don't opt into facing the terrible consequences of war don't. And that creates sort of quite a big divergence in the impact of war on the larger society. But rather than offer some sort of answer, I think this is a question for reflection and an issue that's at the core of what it means to live in this country and in any democratic society. And I think it's my time. Oh, okay. Well, how much has the debt gone up? Anyone? Yes.
When you told us to write down the number, it was at 1,385,989,870.
89 to 94 is 5. So 50 million, right? Oh, sorry. 5 million. Sorry, this was a short. So 5 million. This was a $5 million talk.
Thank you, Daniel.
And you can check it tonight and see how it's gone up. Leave it up.
Thank you, Daniel. So that was a $5 million talk. Wow, I don't have that kind of money. I hope he doesn't expect it. Our next speaker, with an interesting title, I think you'll agree, is Brad Allenby. And Brad is the Lincoln Professor of Ethics and Engineering and the Associate Director of the Lincoln Center. He's a President's Professor of Civil, Environmental, and Sustainable Engineering in the Fulton Schools of Engineering, and a Professor of Law. He's currently President of the International Society for Industrial Ecology. He's the Chair of the American Association for the Advancement of Science Committee of Science, Engineering, and Public Policy. He's a Batten Fellow in residence at the University of Virginia's Darden Graduate School of Business, and he's a Fellow of the Royal Society for the Arts, Manufactures, and Commerce, and he's going to talk on the topic in praise of cheating. Brad.
So I thought what I would do is organize a series of skits for you that would demonstrate how depressingly ordinary these questions are. John, could you stand up, please? Now, I want you to imagine John as a fair young lady. I am her suitor. Janita invites me over to dinner. She has prepared stuffed pepper. She has spent all day slaving over stuffed pepper. Why? God knows. And I come over. I loathe peppers. However, I do not tell her that. The evening goes off relatively without a hitch, despite the fact that every time I look at my plate, I see this loathsome creature looking up at me. I have lied. Is that cheating? How many people think that's cheating? What? You guys lie all the time? You think that's not cheating? Why is that not cheating? Yes. Yeah. Okay, watch her. What is the definition of cheating? My response to that is that I think cheating is a lot more subtle than we tend to give it credit for. It tends to be one of those things that you say, yeah, I know it when I see it, which basically means I know it when I don't like it. John was talking about this, right? So one person's cheating is another person's creativity or innovation. So you guys suddenly have morphed into the Recording Industry Association of America. I am John. And I'm downloading everything I can get my little paws on because I really believe in this like information wants to be free stuff. But you realize that if I get away with that, you are bankrupt. So you get a law passed. And the law says, thou shalt not download. You bet it does. And what's my response? My response is to keep downloading. Why? Because I am John, and you guys are RIAA, and you don't have a prayer of catching me. And if it's John, you probably don't. But if it's me, I'm toast. So, a couple of points about this. One is that the Recording Industry Association of America now has a business model that says that all of their customers are crooks. A word of advice, if you go into business and your business model is predicated on all your customers being thieves and crooks, you probably got problems. The second issue is more profound. I have gotten a law passed that says that you guys are breaking the law. And if breaking the law isn't cheating, I don't know what is. But is it? The fact that I can get an inappropriate law passed, does that make your behavior cheating? Let's go back to Juanita here. So we're through with dinner, and we're sitting in front of a fire, and Juanita asked me if I have gone out with Susie. Now, turns out that Susie is actually, she's a very nice young lady, and I have indeed gone out with Susie, but I really don't want Juanita to know about it. And after all, I have just paid for this evening by eating this slimy little on my plate. And so I don't tell Juanita. Is that cheating? Is that bad? Why is that bad? Why is it okay if I lie to her about food and she thinks I'm entranced with her cooking and I am not going to dinner at Juanita's again, believe me. Why is it okay to lie about that, but not to lie about the fact that I was out with Susie? It's about people. It's about people. It's about intent, right? It's about whether or not I would hurt Juanita. Now, in both cases, I would probably hurt her, but there is a real difference between saying, you know what, this is a really, really bad food. People should not be forced to eat peppers. And saying, you know what, you're cute, Susie's cute, give me 6 months. That's not going to work. So we begin by realizing, I think, that there aren't any easy rules, right? Because what you're telling me is that I've got to be thinking about in what way am I going to hurt Juanita? I'm going to hurt her in both cases, right? Because I'm lying about things that matter to her, but serious difference in what the implications are. So it gets a little bit fuzzier. How many people here think that Lance Armstrong deserved to have all 7 of his Tour de France victories stripped? What? Oh, okay, so for those of you that haven't been following professional cycling on a regular basis, Lance Armstrong is an individual who won the Tour de France 7 times. He beat cancer. He founded a great charity. He seems to have ticked off the U.S. anti-doping agency big time. And so they did a lot of, took a lot of testimony and determined that he had used illegal materials to enhance his performance. They They have blood samples, and they have not found anything in the blood samples, and Lance Armstrong does not admit that he did it. But they stripped all 7 of his Tour de France titles. The Tour de France is a big race if you happen to be into professional bike racing. If you're not into professional bike racing, then you probably have a life. That's not true. You're probably off with John playing World of Warcraft. You have no life. So the question is, and once they determined this, they stripped all 7 of his titles away, and they vacated his victories, and he's not going to be allowed to do anything more in professional cycling. And the question is this fair or not? Assume, for purposes of this discussion, that Lance Armstrong did in fact use doping techniques that are not allowable under the rules of the Cycling Federation. How many people think it was good, it was proper to strip Lance Armstrong of his title? Raise your hands. Okay. How many people think it was not proper? So why do you think it was not proper? The guy cheated.
The question is, during what Tour de France's did he actually dope?
So let me give you an answer. I talked to the question was, did he really dope during the Tour de France? And the answer is that the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency does not know, but they have testimony that indicates that he did. Now, the way you get testimony like that, for any of you that grow up to be criminal lawyers, in which case you're probably not interested in ethics very much at all, the reason that they determined that he was doping is that they get testimony by saying things like, if you tell us what you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we will not charge you with as much as we're going to charge Lance Armstrong. Because Lance Armstrong really is kind of an egotistical guy, and he kind of baited the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, and so we're going to leave the politics out of this. I talked to a doctor at Stanford who works a lot with professional cyclists, and this is what he said. He basically said that if you want to be a professional cyclist, then you have one of 2 choices. Either A, you are a genetic freak, or B, you're going to dope. There is no middle ground.
I was going to say the question is, who else, like out of the top like 20 or 30 in that race, who didn't? Because I know that like in one of them, like if they vacated the win from everyone who's ever been connected to doping, the winner would have been in like 23rd place.
The winner would have been
Right. The winner would have been the one that found the technique that they hadn't caught yet. So the question was, who didn't dope in those races? And that may be the legitimate question. So we have 2 visions here, right? One vision is, I am Lance Armstrong, and I am inherently evil. And I am going to enhance my performance above everybody else's by taking materials that they can't get a hold of, and I am going to win the Tour de France and take it away from widows and orphans. Probably most people would say in a case like that, then you're a cheater. You should be charged and you should be penalized. For example, if any of you happen to be in the World Series and throw a spitball and get caught, you will be penalized. Nobody will be surprised, but you will be penalized. If you use a bat that has been altered, which, by the way, turns out to be against federal law, who knew? But if you use a bat that's been altered, then you will be penalized if they catch you. Those kinds of things are very routine in most sports. And that kind of cheating, that kind of individual cheating, does get punished. Now, if the way I view the issue is, I, Lance Armstrong, am evil and an individual cheater, then I come to one conclusion. But suppose what the Lance Armstrong case is telling us is, to your point, everybody's cheating. That in fact, the state of the technology is that if you're not enhancing, you're not even in play in this sport. How many people here seriously think that so many American guys grow up to be 320 pounds so they can play lineman? You notice 30 years ago they didn't grow up to be 320 pounds. You're going to be a lineman? My advice is to look at the statistics, my friend. So the point is, are they doping or are they just ordinary people who live next door and happen to drink a lot of Budweiser? Now, it's a subtle question. It's fairly clear that in most professional sports, you do have very high levels of doping behavior. It's also clear that among the most common forms of treatment in any professional sport is treatment against pain, right? So it may not be that I dope you up to be some kind of insane monster, although if I could do it, I probably would. It's that the doping does things like hide your base level of pain so you go back out and play with pain. Now, if you're a 320-pound guy routinely running into 320-pound guys and you're doing so with pain because, for example, your knee is in serious trouble and is trying to tell you something, and I give you that treatment and you go out there and continue to do it, you are going to hurt yourself permanently, which is why so many professional sportsmen, in fact, do have very poor quality of life after they leave their sport. So who's wrong here? Is Lance really evil? Or is that case really telling us something about our hypocrisy as a society that we need to be listening to? Is it Lance that's cheating or is it society as a whole? And who's getting cheated? Is it society? Is it the fact that our wistful little dream is that 320-pound guy is really going to be a PhD out of Stanford because we still believe in that myth? Or is it the fact that what we are doing is destroying a lot of individuals because they're part of our entertainment network and that's what we want to see? Suppose that people didn't dope. How many people here would watch an Ivy League game between Princeton and Yale if there was a better game on? I mean, only people who want to go to Princeton and Yale, and most of you guys probably wouldn't watch it anyway. Right? So what the Lance Armstrong case tells us, I think, is that what we're looking at is a really interesting case where we have identified and punished what we regard as a cheater, but what he is really telling us is, no, I'm not the cheater, you guys are the cheater. This happens in other venues too, right? Most of you probably remember the O.J. Simpson trial. What was the essence of the strategy in that trial? Who did you guys think was on trial? Who was on trial in the O.J. Simpson trial? O.J. Simpson. Who? How many people think O.J. Simpson was on trial? Right. That's what we want you to think. What did I do as the defense attorney? I realized that if O.J. Simpson was on trial, I was going to lose. If the LAPD police department was on trial, I had a chance of winning. So what I did was I turned that trial from being about O.J. Simpson into being about the LA Police Department. And in doing that, I got an acquittal for O.J. Simpson because what the jury realized is that the main problem was not O.J. Simpson. He was a problem. He probably did do what they said he did. That's opinion, my opinion only. And I should point out, by the way, at this point, that when I talk about in praise of cheating, ASU does not support that position. The Lincoln Center does not support that position. My mother does not support that position. But it's something you need to think about. So with the O.J. Simpson trial, what happened was the dynamics changed for enough people to be about the Los Angeles Police Department so that the immediate injustice of releasing somebody that may in all likelihood have been guilty was overweighed by the need to realize that society in a fundamental way was cheating its people. A very different kind of dynamic. Take another case. You guys are all pilots for American Airlines. Right? Yeah, well, those of you that know what's going on with American Airlines are not so happy now. That's the point. Now, I'm the federal government, and I am not going to allow you to strike because American Airlines, for some reason, is critical to this country's economy. So I'm not going to let you strike. Now, how are you going to respond as pilots? You can't strike, but you really, really do not like your management. You're going to do what's called work to rule. That means you are going to follow every rule in the book. And you know what that's going to do? That's going to bring down the American transportation system. Good for you. Why does it bring it down? It brings it down because every rule that you follow will be dysfunctional in some real factual situation. So that by following the rules, what you ensure is that you can't work in the real world. Because the real world is too complicated to have a rule that fits every situation. And the way the world works, just as John was pointing out when it comes to things like video games, the way the world works is by filling in the corners. Just like, okay, should I really tell the truth about green, slimy vegetables? Well, no. It's okay. Most of you felt it was okay if I didn't express my true opinion about that. But should I have said something about Susie? Yeah, I should have. Well, notice what you've done. What you've done is you've said, you know, you want a simple rule. You want to say that cheating is if I lie. And your point, no, it's not. The world is more complicated. Boom. Define cheating. So the point I would leave you with before opening for questions is that in a really complex world, in a world where technology is changing rapidly, what you're going to find is that accusations of unlawful behavior and of cheating are being used strategically by a lot of people to try to block the coming of the future. When I say Lance Armstrong cheated, part of what I am saying is, you know what, I really like this idea of a 1920s America where baseball players never cheated. Welcome to the Black Sox. Welcome to the Chicago Black Sox cheating episode, by the way, but we'll leave that aside. You don't know about that because you don't know anything about that history anyway. So what I do is I say, okay, I am going to establish a rule that protects my power against the encroachment of the future. Every DJ that plays with other songs is at least presumably breaking copyright laws, which are very strong when it comes to music. Why do I have those copyright laws? I have those copyright laws because I'm a dinosaur, and I am getting undermined by technology, and I'm trying desperately to protect myself. So the accusation of cheating, particularly in a world that's rapidly changing, tends to be an effort to protect the past at the cost of the future. Is this common? I rest my case. Of course it's common. What that means is that when you're going to think about this, particularly personally, you're going to need to be sophisticated in the way you think about it. And it's not going to require that you know the rules. Rule 1, do not lie. Rule 2, do not cheat. Because nobody really knows what that means. What you need to do is develop the sophistication and the personal integrity to try to understand it yourself. This stuff is not easy. If it was easy, then you wouldn't have to worry about it. This stuff is really, really hard because you struggle with it every day. If you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, I've made a fairly simple and kidding kind of thing, but if you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, you struggle with this every day. If you work with other people, you struggle with this every day. What is right to do in this situation? And of course, you know it will get better as you get older. No, it doesn't. Many people get better at ignoring it, but that doesn't make it better. So I think the challenge is that you've got people like me standing in front of you pontificating. So this is what it means to be an educated person in the 21st century. Bullshit. What it means is the way that you manage your world. And you are going to have challenges that are going to go completely beyond anything that we've seen yet. You're going to have people that are living to 150 and people that are dying at 40 or 50 in different parts of the world. What's right about that? How are you going to handle that? You're going to have a world where resources are going to be determined by military power and military force. Who gets them, who doesn't. You're going to have a world where people become very different by design, where I begin to build into you very different kinds of capabilities. Designer humans. Who gets it, who doesn't. You're going to have an amazing world, but you're going to have a really, really, really difficult world. And for me or anybody else to stand up in front of you and tell you that we think we know how you should behave is bullshit. We don't know. We can help you, we can work with you, we can talk about things that may be applicable, may not, but we cannot tell you how you need to work in your world. All we can do is wish you the best, and that's what I do. Thank you.
Stay here. Okay, now, I promised you the opportunity to ask questions of all four of our presenters. So I'm going to ask them to come up here, and I think they're all mic'd up. Am I right about that, guys? You're all okay.
So
what I'll try to do is identify the questioner, or point to the questioner, and if we can't hear the question in the back, I'll repeat it, and then we'll see how they can answer your questions. And I'll remember, and it's not been that long, but some of us have short memories. My age, we do. Sharon was talking about colorism in media and its effect on the criminal law and the way it's used in this country. John was talking about the issues of cheating in video games. Daniel was talking about issues related to the international scene, and in particular, the cost of the war, and whether or not cheating exists in the way we finance such things. And Brad was talking about, I'm not sure what. No, Brad was talking about, in praise of cheating, that is basically telling you cheating can be not only creative, which is what John was saying, but it can also be constructive in terms of helping you deal with the way the future will be formed, as you, in fact, have a great deal to do with forming it. So, now we've taken a lot of questions also from the folks in the front here, from our students from various high schools in the region, but there's many of you in the back as well, and you may feel equally that you have questions, and so be willing to raise your hand. So let's go ahead and see what we can do, and I will take one from way in the back first of all. And speak up, because even I may not hear you.
I'd like to make a comment on your cost of war video. That 1.4 trillion is over 10 years, and if you look at the gross national product, it's about 15 trillion a year. That's 1%, slightly less than 1% per year. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot of money to me. It's not something that's going to ruin the country. However, my Republican friends tell me it's a business opportunity.
Daniel, you want to comment on this?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's certainly true that the wars didn't bankrupt, 10 years of war hasn't destroyed the country or bankrupted the country. This is a country that can afford to fight expensive wars. I think the interesting question isn't whether, they're quite expensive wars, but the question is the way in which the financing of the wars was managed. Certainly the wars could have been paid for by those who decided, as part of a policy to go to war, rather than being pushed onto those who weren't around to make the decisions, like the audience in the front. But clearly the U.S. could afford to, those weren't costs that produced the sort of economic destruction of the country. That certainly wasn't the point.
Other question.
Whether they were financially beneficial is another question, whether, say, access to oil has turned out to be useful or not. I mean, that's an argument, although probably, access to oil doesn't require, generally around the world, invasion.
Thank you. Okay, right here.
When there is an altercation about the definition of cheating, what systems are currently in place to decide whose definition wins and who's right?
When there's an altercation about the definition of cheating, who gets to decide whether cheating has actually occurred? Brad, or do you want to take that one?
I think that that's a very profound question. What you generally find is that the systems that are in power get to make the definition. So, for example, let's consider an issue that has to do with the war. We're fighting a war against terrorists. If you talk to people who are concerned about the U.S. position, they may not call themselves terrorists. They would call themselves freedom fighters. The words that are used in these kinds of conflicts are very, very important because they're often loaded. That is to say, they carry emotional and even legal connotations when you use them. One of the things to always look at when you hear somebody getting into a conflict about this kind of issue, whether it's cheating or something that's more legalistic, look at who is doing the defining of the term and for what purposes they're defining it. So, for example, the RIAA, Recording Industry Association of America, would clearly say that downloading their product illegally, music illegally, is not only cheating, but a violation of the law, and they would be technically right on both counts. The counter-argument that people who oppose that position make is that the fact that they've come up with a bogus definition and managed to get that embedded in law does not by itself make it right. Very difficult questions. And it comes down to what I said at the end. It throws it back to you to have to understand why people are saying what they're saying and the rationale that's driving them to that position, and then you have to decide which one you think is right. Because if you buy somebody's prepackaged definition, it's going to reflect their perspective, and their perspective may not at all be what they're saying publicly.
And I'd like to build on that with something else that Brad had said earlier, and that's not only do a lot of these decisions get made by the people in power, they also often get made by people who don't understand what's really going on or how things are being used. And the cases we have in common are where there's one set of uses that the people who own this stuff think is legitimate. And then there's another set of uses that we think is legitimate. Who gets to decide there is a crucial question. And since laws tend to get made by folks who are a little removed from how we do new things, they're often made by people who really don't have a deep understanding of the issue. And, in all fairness, if you're a member of Congress who's, getting on in years and who doesn't really interact directly with a lot of new technologies, you're going to go with your gut. And your gut was conditioned a long time ago. So you're going to go with the older, more traditional answer. You're also going to go with your campaign contributors, which tend to be not the new innovative startup companies, but the established industries. And one of those ways of deciding is as legitimate as anything else. You go with what you know. One of those where you go with is helping you out, probably not as ethical. So even in the question of who decides, gets more complicated by what exactly their motives are.
Questions? Over here.
So when it comes to, this is directed towards Sharon mainly, when it comes to diversity initiatives and affirmative action things, do you see any elements of cheating in those dynamics?
Sharon?
Affirmative policy is tricky because, of course, affirmative laws were created and designed to try to level the playing field. Who has benefited from it, in questions of who's now benefiting and should they be abolished, very contentious type questions. I was talking about something a little bit different than diversity initiatives in the country. But of course, what you're talking about is, I'm talking about diversity in a way. Let me say this about, I was just about to say something about ethics in media, and that will maybe address that a little bit. First of all, the media gives us the picture that's in our heads. All of us have some kind of relationship to the media because we're all exposed to media, okay? So a long time ago, 1922, Walter Lippmann said, the media give us the picture that's in our head. Whatever picture you get in your head about affirmative policy, about who's benefited from affirmative action, whether we should have policy that would equate attendance at colleges and universities and high school based on race, whether or not we should integrate schools, all of this policies, these are affirmative policies, okay? The biggest beneficiaries, say for example, that's been recorded for affirmative action policy have been Caucasian women, of course, who, of course, were considered underrepresented. Let me just say that. But if the media give us the pictures in our heads, then whatever we experience in media, all right, expose us to our ideas about the world, about people. If you've never been to Australia, then you'll have the media version of the Down Under. If you had never been to Adelaide or Melbourne or Sydney, then you would take the media version. You know, that's not a knife. Remember? It's a knife, okay? So if you've never been to New York, you will have the media version of New York. If you've never been to the South, you will have the media version in the South, or to England, or to France. But once you experience any locale, any individual, any population for yourself, then you have your direct experience. What I'm saying is that because the media gives us the pictures in our heads about all of us, what it means to be a person of color, African American, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a co-ed, then we depend on media for accuracy and for truth and for fairness. And there's a gap between the practice and the ideal. If you have never had your first kiss, you have right now the media version of what that kiss is going to be like. I know I grew up with it, how it's going to be wonderful, and how it was going to be. Because I grew up in the age, you know, where when I was small, everybody smoked on TV, okay? So of course my first kiss was going to be, I was going to be smoking a cigarette, and my hair was going to be very long, not 3 braids, but very brunette and long and silky. And a guy was going to be, in my mind, from the media version, a guy was going to come into a bar and say, "Can I light that cigarette for you?" And I was going to say, "Sure." And he was going to light the cigarette, and then I would flick it out, and grab it, and we would live happily ever after. That's the media version in my head, and I grew up that's the way my first kiss was going to be, something like that. But the real first kiss, nothing like it. Nothing like it. Oh no, you know, in play at a birthday party, you know, playing tag. And it was more like a little puppy dog kiss. Was I kissed? How was it? Okay. So I'm saying to you, the impact of media is prominent in our world, and what we experience in media becomes our reality. The more you consume media messages, print, broadcast, digital, online, it doesn't matter, all of it, the more you have the media version of reality.
Does anyone else want to comment on this? Questions? Yes, right over here. Could you speak up a little bit? Could you speak up a little bit?
And also the video games, I guess. I know you said that the media influences us, but how can it be the other way around?
Beautiful question.
You want to go ahead and repeat it? You're on.
Is the media influencing us, or is it the other way around? Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of those really crucial questions that are the difficult stuff that we're trying to talk about up here. And what I see in talking to people about video games, particularly about talking to older folks who might have kids who are playing and who didn't play themselves, is they think about games the way they think about television. You sit there and it kind of shoves ideas into your head. And that's why a lot of folks are concerned about video game violence. You know, they think you're going to, you know, their kids are going to sit there and get these horrible notions shoved into their head. But what we're seeing in new media, in games, and in a lot of interactive entertainment is we're communicating with them and we're pushing back against what the designers are trying to tell us. And yeah, we do learn stuff in video games, but it's not one way. It's not them sticking things in our heads. It's our doing things, figuring things out, learning for ourselves, making our own decisions with the game kind of helping us do that. And I think a lot of new media are very, very different from the old broadcast, sit down, shut up, and let me stick things in your head model. And I think there's a lot of hope in that.
Sharon?
Don't get me started with video games. Don't get me started. For Mortal Kombat, I mean, please, okay? Because anytime you design games where it's okay to kill women because they're morally corrupt, say they're prostitutes, we can kill all the prostitutes we want to, okay? It's okay. Grand Theft Auto, please don't get me started. Because morally, it's okay to kill women because they're considered, if they're bad or we judge them bad. And then we can talk about violent video games, and we can talk about how people of color are depicted in video games in general, and you know how they are. It's not flattering, it's not favorable, okay? Is it okay to kill women because they're called prostitutes in video games? Is it okay to kill sexual minorities in video games? I don't think we have that so far, where we got a lot of gay, lesbian, transgendered people being, but we definitely do have a lot for women. So please, I don't want to go to video games too much. Let me stop.
Well, I think there's a really good point here in that a lot of the messages, and we all know this, a lot of the messages in games are nasty. A lot of our behavior in games have nothing to do with the games is nasty. I suspect some of us in this room have talked some serious trash on Xbox Live. And that's a real issue that we need to think about in terms of how that's affecting our behavior. But I just came back from doing a talk in England on video games and international humanitarian law. And this was a question that the Red Cross is actually looking into is, in contemporary military shooters that are set in real life situations, does video game behavior shape our attitudes, our beliefs, and what we do? And what we see is most of the folks who join the Army have played about a bajillion hours of Call of Duty.
Right.
And the messages you get in Call of Duty about human rights law are basically, and you learn to do stuff like shoot the medic first, right? Which is not legal. But something really interesting is happening. If I'm an 18-year-old who joins the Army, I've played a bazillion hours of Call of Duty, and I've reinforced these lessons in doing nasty stuff to digital other humans. And then I join the Army, and I get this little tiny bit of training from the Judge Advocate General on the laws of armed conflict. And I go out into the field where I'm scared, I'm under fire, I'm making thousands and thousands of split-second decisions about whether somebody else is going to live or die. And just about all the time, I make the right one. Now, how is it that all those hours training to do nasty stuff in video games, and those few hours of listening to some guy talk about the laws of war, I do the right thing when my life is on the line? We don't know how that works. We don't know how learning in video games works and doesn't work. We do know it's something new, and it raises some really interesting and strange questions.
I want to take this one step further, and we have two people at the end down here who have been investigating and working on issues that relate to drones. And again, if many of you are aware, we fight a lot now with robotic warfare technologies, including drones, that may be in fact operated in Las Vegas, Nevada, but do their business in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other places. I wonder if Daniel and Brad would want to get in on this a little bit.
I could say one thing, having, I was talked to a lot of people in the drone world, drone pilots and like that there's a standard line that those who fly drones have a video game mentality towards their engagement with combat. And I'll just relate to you a story of a recent drone pilot I was speaking with who talked about the intimacy of the engagement between the pilot and the targets, because in traditional, certainly air power, say you fly an F-16 or an A-10, any of those planes, you spend very little time seeing the target. In fact, you don't even see the target at all in a very fast plane. And you know very little about them, whereas drones, they hover over areas and do what they call patterns of life, where they learn who the people are, they have a sense of who their family members are, hover over them for long periods of time and kind of get to know them and have an intimate relationship both with the people before there's an attack and then subsequent after the attack. They hover around and follow and see. And in a strange way, it has an impact to pilots that's a lot more, what's the way to say it, like they feel that attack more than a lot of those folks who have a more distant relationship with flying fighters. Anyhow, it's a common misconception, and it's interesting to talk to pilots doing that sort of work. And I'll just add one other odd point is that unlike traditional military folks who are, say, flying planes out of a base, when you're a drone pilot, you run a mission and literally step out of that area and go and see your family for lunch, which is the point of all of that, perhaps in relationship to this discussion of technology, is that we're seeing a transformation of what warfare means at multiple levels that we don't know where it's all going, and I know that Brad's done a lot of work on that.
And the interesting thing about drones and ethics is that you have different rules depending on who's operating a drone. If I am U.S. military personnel operating a drone, I operate under very stringent rules, and my targets are reviewed very carefully. It is a very, I think it's fair to say, ethical operation. If I'm the CIA operating a drone, I operate under a different set of norms and a different set of rules. What would be inappropriate for a military operator may not be inappropriate for an intelligence operator and may be legal for a private firm that's operating a drone that may or may not be explicitly associated with the United States. The bigger question this raises, and cyber is an area where this comes out very clearly, the bigger questions this raises is we have a whole set of morals and ethics and norms and laws that we have put in place over centuries to try to manage to some extent the brutality and the ugliness of war. These are really, really important rules. They may be difficult to follow. They may be broken in some cases. They are broken in cases. But they still manage, to the extent that we humans have been able to do it, they still manage to control the brutality of war to some extent. It is very likely that technology is undermining those laws of war. Those laws of war assume things like, for example, it's a state fighting a state. Well, we all know that the Islamic jihadist movement is not a state. They don't sign the Geneva Convention. They are not bound by any of these conventions. So how does that work? Moreover, there are rules that talk about a combatant versus non-combatant status. Don't worry about that, but think about the fact that if you are a warfighter, if you are in a military, then you can kill me, but I can also kill you. Now, ordinarily, and under the laws of war, that tends to apply to a battlefield, right? I mean, if I am in the Napoleonic army and, you know, Napoleon, I don't know, takes over Spain or something, and I go off to, if I go off to Mallorca and I kind of have a good time, technically, you shouldn't be able to kill me in Mallorca because I'm not a combatant. I'm not threatening you. I'm off duty. I'm just can't attack me. But that doesn't hold anymore, right? Think about this drone pilot. How would we feel if somebody set off an IED in some highway in Las Vegas to try to take out the drone pilot? We would think that was pretty illegal, pretty unlawful, pretty cheating. But in fact, it may be that it is legal because, of course, he's a combatant. Is he bringing the battlefield with him? What happens if he goes to Peru? Can they blow up something in Peru? Can we blow up something in Peru if a terrorist leaves Pakistan and goes to Peru on her vacation? There's a lot of issues that are coming up now, and the reason that it's important, this is part of why I'm saying you need to be ready to rethink a lot of what you think you know. Because a lot of what you think you know has been told you by people like me that are not part of your world, that's already in existence. One of the things to worry about is as these large institutional structures that have protected us for a long time are undermined by technology, just like Lance Armstrong, what's the substitute? What are you going to do? How are you going to put something in place? How are you going to behave? Who tells you what the rules are? Where do those rules come from? And you need to think about that because our generation really didn't have to, because it was relatively stable. It's not stable for you guys anymore.
Another question. Another question.
Over here.
So
Over
to
here.
cross across all the ethical things that we've talked about, do you think that we need to focus more on media or education for inspiring ideas in a new generation of critical thinking skills to better combat these, whether it be racism or wars?
We need to be media literate, without question. So the commonality for all of our topics, disparate topics, but we need to be a more media literate society. What do I mean by media literate? You need to be media consumers who are critical media consumers who think seriously about the impact and influence of media. In terms of the development of media in this country, ever since there has been a nation, there's been concern about how media influences us, going back to the very beginning of media in this country. The first research in media came about when comic books developed. Now, you probably might not be. How many of you still read comic books, even a generation? Oh, really? Okay, they're making a comeback. They're making a comeback. But the beginning of comic books started the concern, okay, about the development of media impact. So we need to be media literate. We need to be very critical media consumers. But going back to comic books, parents were concerned, just like we're concerned now in the digital age, about the impact of video games. Parents were concerned about how comic books influence the society. We're concerned about video games, where the video game playing causes aggressive behavior and violence in society. We have psychologists, social psychologists, who are studying the role of video games in aggressive behavior. Exposure to video games causes people to be violent. We don't know the answer to that. It's a very, very research question right now. But we do know that after people watch violence, after they are exposed to aggressive play, young and older, teens and adults, that psychologists have found that in their next interaction after being exposed to the violence, they tend to be more aggressive, okay? That definitely has been shown in the research. So the commonality for this, we need to be more media literate, and it is true that while the media influence us, we at the same time direct and lead and influence media, because the media are trying to give us what we want and what they think that we want.
So I probably have a different perspective than most of the people up here. I don't think either education or media work very well when it comes to ethics. I think that ethics is, particularly for you folks, ethics is going to be as much an experimental science as it is something that is handed down by rules. Because you're going to face situations that nobody in history has yet faced. Let's see. So for example, if I ask you whether the first Neanderthal to be recreated and born should be carried by a chimp surrogate or a human surrogate, what would your answer be? And if you think that the ethical rules and thoughts that the people up here on stage are going to guide you in that decision, you're wrong, because most of us haven't thought about it. These are very different issues than the kinds of things that we've had to deal with. Media, to the extent you're dealing with old media, you're dealing with people that have no idea of the kind of world you live in. Education, to the extent you're, no, I won't say that, okay. All right, I want to be a little careful here.
Actually, I'm going to bring that up,
With the exception
Brad.
of your teachers, okay? A lot of educators do not understand the world that you're already in. If I take an fMRI of your brains and I compare it to my brain trying to do something like multitasking, you will show up differently, and you will show up differently because you are hardwired differently. And you are hardwired differently because you have bonded to technology in different ways than I ever could, because the technology didn't exist when my brain was establishing its basic patterns. So in some ways, you are already a different human varietal than I am. Now you should learn from me, and you should learn from everybody up here. But you should remember that there is a fundamental limit to what we can teach you because you are in a different world and you are facing very different problems.
With that, I had one question I wanted to ask the panel, and I'm going to ask them to respond very quickly, because then we still have a couple more things to do before we are done for the morning. And that is, education is what we're about and what they're about and what everyone here is about. But there's a certain rule, you might say, in education, or a concept that has to do with the concept of plagiarism. And I'm wondering if in the world you've been describing, that still applies, and is that the concept going through a radical change?
That is a fantastic question.
Of course it is. I'm your
I remember I was like standing in the elevator a little while back with somebody who works in one of the programs that I'm associated with at ASU. And we were talking, but they just made the announcement about Google Glasses, which, if you don't know, it's a product that's going to be coming out from Google at the end of the year that are glasses that are wired to the internet. So you can actually see on your lenses, you can Google stuff. And I mentioned this, and she said, "Oh my God, we're never going to be able to stop the cheating." And my response was, "Oh my God, what an amazing opportunity for learning." One thing I'd like you to take away is, please do never, never confuse education and learning. Entirely different things. And this is one question that's been around for a while, because ever since the ancient Greeks and Plato, when we first started writing, there have been educators going, "Oh, with this new technology, students are going to get lazy, they're going to be able to look things up and not keep it all in their brains." I know right now, most of my brain is in my laptop. I don't necessarily remember a lot of stuff because I know I can look it up in 2 seconds. That's going to be radically the case for you. And the question you want to be asking whenever anybody's lecturing you about any of these issues is, how are you going to be living your life in 5 years or 10 years? And what is it going to mean to be a functioning member of society? If that means that I can go to a party and I got my glasses on and I can pull up your Facebook profile and go, "Hey, how was that ski trip last week?" Is that cheating? Or is that just going to be a part of life? Hard questions. With plagiarism, in some ways, it's a little bit simpler, because there is a difference between remix, where I'm going to credit the other DJ, or I'm going to credit the composer, and do my own mashup, and saying, "Oh, I actually wrote that." Yeah, Shakespeare. Yeah, that was all me. Lying's a pretty clear case. Beyond that, it gets a little sticky.
Thank you. And
Wait a minute, whoa.
Oh, you want to say one thing? I was afraid of that.
Let me preface this by saying that you should never, ever plagiarize. And the reason you shouldn't is that the laws, I'm sure at your school and at a place like ASU, are very, very clear and very, very strong. And that is, if you plagiarize, if you take other people's work and you quote it without attribution, that is regarded as one of the prime academic sins, and you will be punished. So never, ever do that. That said, remember when plagiarism was developed. It was developed, 50, 60, 70 years ago, at least? What was information then? Remember what the ex-CEO of Google said. He said, every 2 weeks we produce more information than was produced in the entire world up until 2003. And of course, everybody argues about whether it was 2002 and a half, or maybe it was 1980. Forget it. The reality is that those rules were developed in a period when developing new information ab initio from the beginning was very important to culture and to society, because we didn't have much information. And the information we had was hard to get. You have Google. You have no idea what you have. Every one of you, when you open that computer, is a deity, because you have at your beck and call the entire accumulated memory of the human race. That has never happened before. The idea that you are not changed by that is ridiculous. Now, you're idiot savants, if you'll pardon my saying so. And the reason is that you have access to that, but you don't know what to do with it. Part of what you do when you have a surfeit of information is you create new knowledge and new content by combining information in new and interesting ways. And a lot of what plagiarism does is pretend that information needs to be developed from the beginning by you and by you alone to be valuable. I don't buy it. I think that plagiarism and a lot of other patterns are already outmoded. It's just going to take them a long time to die. What you want to do is you want to make sure that, like Lance Armstrong, you're not collateral damage of change. I don't know what you have on Facebook, but if you have anything on Facebook that you don't want the IBM recruiter to be looking at 6, 7 years from now, you better get rid of it. Why? Because they are going to look at it, and what you think is perfectly acceptable behavior, and in fact what they were doing when they were your age, which they're going to forget about, dancing on tables with inappropriate costumes, you know, that kind of thing is going to come back and bite you. Now, eventually, culture and social patterns will change. But never, ever try to play games when you're in a period of change, because like Lance Armstrong, like a lot of other people, you'll become collateral damage as a result.
At this point, I know you have other questions, but time is of the essence and we're running out of it. I'd like to thank all of our presenters today. Thank you. Also, before we have a closing remarks from our founding chair, I'd like to thank the person who has done the most to make this all happen, and that is Kelly O'Brien, our programs director.
Okay. Can we go sit
And now I'd like to ask, well, I'm going to thank them. All right. Before I ask our founding chair to say some closing remarks, I also think that all of us in the room should thank all of you because you're terrific. And we really do mean what we say about how the world that's coming is your world and you're going to be responsible for it. So it's about time. Get on it because it's in need. You all may have picked up one of these sheets on your way in or during the break. If you didn't, I believe they're at the door, and they are, of course, a sheet that tells you what you've been through today, but also you'll notice that there's QRs on here that get you onto our sites on your smartphones and other things that read that sort of stuff that I know nothing about, but I'm told that that's how it works. And if you're interested also in some of the things that you've heard, you'll find a lot of it on the site, and hope you'll go to it and have a chance to explore it. And also feel free to contact the Lincoln Center, which you can do through the site, or to any of these folks up here, because I'm sure they'd like to carry on the conversation with you in the future. But it's now my privilege and honor to introduce to you the person who made the Lincoln Center possible. And he's going to say a few closing words, and that is David Lincoln. And David, it's all yours.
Thanks, Peter, and hi. This has been an outstanding program, and we thank you all for coming. This is the third of the series of these, and the person that had the idea for these series was Maynard Bloomer, a member of the church that I go to, and Maynard is here. Maynard, do you want to stand up and raise your hand or something? Maynard put a lot of work into the getting the series started, but as Peter pointed out, Kelly O'Brien was the one that really has organized these things, and without Kelly, nothing would have happened. The first of these was at our first and second of these was at our church. At the second one, we invited some of the high schools, but we did it too late for many of them to come. This time we did it right, and we got a whole bunch of you high school folks here, and we think this is a terrific idea, and I hope that we can continue in the future. to sort of concentrate on having these symposiums for the primary benefit of you high schools, because it's been pointed out today, you're the future, you're going to be in charge, and we hope that we can tell you about ethics in some way so that you have a good feel for ethics. The Lincoln Center is at ASU, obviously, and it evolved from my belief and my strong feeling that good ethics is good business. And I think this applies to individuals also, that I say that if you're ethical during your lifetime, when you die, you'll have a higher estate than if you weren't ethical. And I firmly believe that, but the problem is ethics is something that's a long-term concept, and those things that are unethical are something that is short-term, and it gives you, perhaps you think, a short-term advantage, but it will penalize you long-term, and it will penalize you in ways that you don't realize that you're going to be penalized. The Lincoln Center was was nurtured and developed and designed by Peter, and Peter now has a whole stable of professors and fellows. How many are there now, Peter? 25 fellows and professors throughout Arizona State University. We're on all 4 campuses. We're on, I think, all of the schools in the university. And Peter has developed a unique design for the Lincoln Center. We're sort of a model that many other universities and many other places are trying to copy. So, Peter, we thank you for doing an outstanding job for developing the Lincoln Center. And with that, again, I say thank you, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you next year at the number 4 of these.
Well, that's it for today. I know that you're going to have your buses out there for those of you who are going back to your schools. Again, thank you so much for your attendance. And if you think that these folks are amazing, which I do, there's another 21 of them that are involved in the center, as David said. And on top of that, dealing with them is like herding cats, as you could tell. Well, all right. Take care. Have a good day. See you soon.